Hello everyone, and welcome to my roundup. Welcome to Nerdaholics. This is Jack, as you probably know. Welcome to my roundup of Darksiders II. In the background, you can see just the Crucible stuff that I did earlier. Well, I did this all off camera because it's not that interesting. There's not really anything to talk about. It's just 100 levels of fighting stuff, which is fun enough. But background stuff while I'm talking. Now, this isn't scripted, but I do have notes that I'm going from, and we're just going to do a bit of a chat about the game itself. Now, for those of you who've seen me play through the whole thing, watched all the parts, thank you very much. You probably know a few of my thoughts and feelings as we're going through. For those of you who haven't, I would advise watching some of those, because some of the stuff I'll talk about, I might reference back. I don't really know yet. It depends on how the how the notes go. Right, so let's jump straight into it. The first thing I'm going to talk about is gameplay. The gameplay in itself, as you would have seen, and you might well see from some of the footage playing in the background, is that the gameplay I felt was fine. In terms of being a spectacle fighter, I have to say I kind of hindered myself a little bit while playing by the fact that I got very lucky or unlucky, depending on how you want to define it, by getting scythes that drained health every time they hit something straight off the bat. And that basically stopped me from really exploring too much in the way of different play styles. The way I was playing the game, it basically just made me into sort of a bit of a melee run at people. And as you can see here, I was kind of starting to do a magic build. I just kind of flowed through with it and just had little armies of stuff follow me around killing things. So I never really had that much of a problem. Now, admittedly, yes, I was playing this on an easier setting, so ultimately, I never really had too much of a problem with anything that came up. I think I only died 3 times during the whole thing, and to be honest, had I been putting more effort in, I probably wouldn't have died to those. So, shrug. But in terms of, there were some little niggles with the gameplay parts, things where it's kind of like climbing walls, and when you're trying to do complicated sort of manoeuvring, well, not even complicated, some things that should in theory be fairly average in terms of the movement, things like sort of jumping backwards off ledges, off pillars to kind of get to the next section you're supposed to be clinging to, it doesn't really flow as smoothly as it should do, and it's a bit of a strain to try and get all the looks and get all the bits and pieces facing in the right area to do it. So it's not fantastic, but it's not bad. It played smoothly enough that I didn't really have much of a problem with it. I mean, there were a few issues. I mean, one of the early parts, to give an example of sort of the control scheme for these, if you look back on one of the parts where I was fighting the giant guardian in the Forge Lands, trying to climb up his arm was frustrating, because you're trying to do it under time pressure, because obviously you want to kill him, and you want to kill him before he kind of comes back, before he starts to reform himself. But then you want to climb up the arm, and when the controls aren't quite as smooth as you'd like them to be, it's not fantastic. There are also a few little convenience features that they put in, something like not having to change what's in your your equipped item, if that makes sense. So whether it's the spectral hand or the gun, or one of the if you put a quick play magic spell in there or something, when it's a case of you've got to do things like jumps and climbing and so on, you can just sometimes hit R2 to go straight to the spectral hand, which doesn't always work, which I thought was it was nice if it worked properly every single time. I get there are going to be some times where it doesn't quite hit perfectly, but it's kind of, either don't put it in or make sure it works each time. I think that's kind of realistically the only thing for that. When it comes to some of the gameplay stuff, there's two ways of playing this game. One as a melee person or with Harbinger skills, which is kind of what I did, but I didn't use any of the Harbinger skills. Or you can play it as a Necromancer, which is basically melee or magic you're picking there. And I kind of did a weird crossbreed. Like I said, I was going for a magic build, so Necromancer, but then I got really kitted out for melee, and I probably could have done more damage, and it goes into why I died. Had I gone straight for like either a pure mage or pure Harbinger build, probably wouldn't have had as many problems, because I would have kitted myself out a little bit differently. But shrug, I still did well enough, I think, for an easy playthrough. Like I said, it's more of a chilling out run. Is that I'm not trying to prove I'm brilliant here. This is more about just doing something good. Okay, so moving off gameplay and the control scheme for this, let's talk about the story in itself. In that it doesn't really have one. Now, this is something I spoke about a little bit. Hang on. Sorry about that. This is something I spoke about briefly while playing the game. There's not really a story in this game, like almost at all. The premise is that Death is trying to save war by wiping out his crime, by bringing back humanity. Okay, so everything should be in service of bringing back humanity. So why is all this stuff about corruption happening? It's not linked in. It's kind of like it's either the story is about Death going around stopping corruption in various worlds, or it's about him bringing back humanity. It's one or the other, or you've got to intrinsically link them to the point that the universe is becoming corrupt because humanity's not there. Whatever. I'm not a story writer, but I can tell that these are two distinct stories that don't quite mesh. So something does need to be something should have been done along those lines for sorting that. Because what you've basically got here is it's 4 main worlds: Forge Lands, Kingdom of the Dead, Lost Light, and Shadow's Edge. You could argue that the Crowfather's place is a world, even though it's only really one level right at the beginning of the game. You can't argue that Earth is a world, mainly because it just runs exactly as a dungeon. There's even a dungeon map on it, for goodness sake. And it just kind of it doesn't. It just becomes a whole. The worlds. It's just basically a collection of worlds that you go through. And the sad thing is, I don't know if it's just the developers running out of time, or that they just hadn't really planned too well, but a lot of effort obviously went into the Forge Lands, less so into Kingdom of the Dead, less into Lost Light, and then even less into Shadow's Edge. The Forge Lands had sort of 3 major dungeons, as like so it's got 4 major dungeons, sorry. It's got a couple of side dungeons and a little mini dungeon on the way to one of the bigger dungeons. So it's kind of, there's plenty going on there. Kingdom of the Dead has running around the world map for a bit, then sort of 4 dungeons, and no, actually no, it's 5, because the Gilded Arena is a dungeon as well, isn't it? So that's 5 dungeons that you've got, that you're running around on there. So it's actually probably the highest dungeon count, even though like a couple of them are quite short. Going into Lost Light, Land of the Angels, world map, climb up the tower, Earth, which is a dungeon, and the city, City of Angels, which is a second dungeon. So it's 2 dungeons, both of which are relatively long, but not massive. Climbing up the tower is fairly short. Then Shadow's Edge is 1 dungeon, and that's it. And if you want to argue it's 2 dungeons because of the time travel mechanic, I will tell you you're wrong, because the time travel mechanic is just built into what the dungeon is. I don't think many people try to make that argument though, but I have seen that a couple of times, so I'm just going to squash that one now. So we'll go back to the story after we talk about the worlds briefly. So with the Forge Lands, obviously had the most development, but what was the point of going there? Like I said, the premise of the story is Death is trying to absolve war of his crimes. Now, you could argue that there's no point to going to the Forge Lands at all. If the Crowfather at the very beginning had just told Death, right, here's the deal. You basically got to go into the tree, inside the Tree of Life, and that will solve. You can then sacrifice either the Nephilim. You can sacrifice the Nephilim pendant to bring back humanity. That will work. It's like, okay, fine. but then it's like you could then argue that he would still need to go to the land of the dead to sort out the wailing host at the abyss. But ultimately, there's nothing he does in the Forge Lands that achieves anything for any purpose. It's just the first place he goes because he was thrown there by the Tree of Life. Also by the portal that the Crowfather forged. So the Crowfather told him the truth not even told him the truth, just told him everything from the beginning. It's like you can argue that it's like, oh yes, he saved the Forge Lands, but you could also argue that when he killed the source of corruption in the Tree of Life, the rest of the corruption would eventually have died off. No new corruption would have come through. So the Makers would have been fine on their own, really. So they wouldn't have been able to leave until that big one died, but then it would have been okay in the long run. But ultimately, there's not a lot there. Not a lot that's really story relevant, to be honest. It's like, in terms of, and the sad thing is, it's obviously the most well-developed area in terms of having dungeons to do. A lot of side quests are involved around that area. There's not hordes to do. But some like two of the four thing. Well, God, I think it's two of the things they hunt. Two out of the four things to hunt are in the Forge Lands. So it's kind of actually I think three of them are. I think three of them are in there. So it's kind of, and the last one's in the Land of the Dead. So it's like you got enough side mission stuff involved in and around the Forge Lands that it makes it more relevant. But also it's completely irrelevant as an area. And also one of the things is it's also the best area for riding around the horse on. It's kind of, you can't really ride the horse at all in Shadow's Edge or Lost Light. There's just nowhere to do it. In terms of Land of the Dead, you can ride the horse around there, but it's kind of a lot more sort of like fairly narrow corridor areas. You can't really do it as much as you can in the Forge Lands. So it's kind of a bit like, okay. Right. So, in terms of stuff and spectacle though, the boss fight with the Guardian is a lot of fun. It gets a bit frustrating because of how they've got it all set up, but I did feel fairly epic when I killed it, so I will give it credit for that. Okay, moving on to the Land of the Dead. Land of the Dead, this feels a little bit more restrictive, because in terms of like where you can travel, it is all just corridors, effectively. Not quite as bad as like Final Fantasy 13 or anything. There is still scope to move around, but the set piece areas aren't that big. It's like it's kind of, there's less off the beaten track to find as there was in the Forge Lands. There's not so much you can kind of go and do, which is a bit of a nuisance, I will fully admit, and it's not as much fun, but it is what it is. So you just kind of have to live with that a little bit, and I'm okay with it, because it's still enough. There's still plenty going on there that made it feel like it was worth going to and it still felt like a fleshed out enough place. I will argue that it got a little bit tedious, because it's kind of, at one point it was very much a case of when it comes to like the dungeons and missions, it's all groups of three. It's like, okay, get the three horns to get open the guild, to get summon the champion of the Gilded Arena, to get the Lord of the Dead's permission to go into the City of the Dead. You need to find his three generals. It's kind of, it's lots of groups of three, and I get why three, because three is usually the sweet spot number for getting things done. It's just enough to feel like a challenge, but not too much to feel like it's overdone. I get that from a game perspective. Something reassuring about the number 3 when it comes to stuff like that. Now, as for... Well, we'll talk about corruption a little bit later. We'll talk about that later. Okay. So, next area is Lost Light. Lost Light, the main thing I'm going to say about Lost Light is about corruption. We'll talk about corruption now. Forge Lands, obviously corrupted. Corruption's a big problem there for them. Very obvious. The Land of the Dead, I didn't notice any real problem with corruption at all. If there was anything there, then I didn't see it. And, that's not so bad. It's a bit of a nuisance. Well, it's not a nuisance, it just doesn't fit the theme. If corruption is, again, one of the problems, it's kind of, you're either doing these areas out of order, or you need to work out a different way of connecting this all together. Like, if you're trying to show, like, progression, maybe it's like the Forge Lands is like the last area you go to where corruption's really taken hold of like of multiple worlds, and the Land of the Dead is the area you go to first. I don't know, maybe that would be the way to do it, because corruption's not done anything there yet, and then it's kind of like, oh look, then you go to say Shadow's Edge, where corruption isn't really a big deal, but starting to show a few signs. Lost Light, City of Angels, it's like that's corruption's a big deal there. I would argue that they've suffered the worst, because they've got a whole dead City of Angels there, whereas the Makers are still around in, well, all 4 of them are still floating around. 5 of them, sorry, because Khan's there as well, isn't he? Right. But yeah, so going into Lost Light is very much, as I was just saying, Lost Light is very much shown that corruption's taken hold and ruined that place quite badly. I mean, there's only, what, 3... Well, there's actually only 1 angel that's not been corrupted, Nathaniel. All the others have corrupted. And you end up having to kill them. I think the Scribe... I don't remember if you kill the Scribe or not, but I think it's kind of left that he is dead or dying. So it's like, But yeah, that... Lost Light, again... Okay, so Lost Light, in terms of... Lost Light had Earth as a dungeon. Now, when I first saw that, when I was first playing through, the very first time I played Darksiders, I loved that idea, because I really loved playing on Earth in the first Darksiders game. It's just... It felt like a really appropriate, really quite... It was interesting to see what demons did with the apocalypse on Earth. I'll go back to my favourite example of this is the Iron Canopy as an area, because it's basically just the top of a few skyscrapers that have got loads of spider's web connecting various chunks of different buildings together. But it's kind of, that's pretty cool, because it's kind of like, it makes sense. It makes the reason for the name is fairly obvious, and it's kind of like, it feels like a demon area. It feels like demons have taken this place and corrupted it and done their own thing with it. So, you know, that was fairly interesting. Going back to Earth, where it's just like Earth, and it's like, okay, it's just like a ruined street, you know, there's nothing interesting about it. You're walking around through ruined areas, you're seeing some corruption, a few demon things poking through, but nothing so much that it really is. It doesn't feel the same, you know. It just feels like ruined Earth, rather than, you know, rather than everything being an actual destroyed area, or having a sort of a demon name, or like demons claimed this area and called it this, you know. So it's kind of, it didn't quite feel right. Now, on the other side of things, the Lost Light as a world, when you get to the sort of the City of Angels, I don't remember if it had an actual name for that sort of that second dungeon, but it's kind of like that place was appropriately creepy, considering how angels had all fallen and died, and everything was there was either like the little black spirits that kind of came off the dead angels that were lying on the floor because they're corrupted souls, all that stuff. Or were they corrupted souls? Were they just little monsters that were nibbling away at the remains? It's kind of a scary thought to think about. But you know, but it was quite interesting to be in that sort of area. And again, like I said, it's kind of very much obvious that corruption's had a big problem there. It's been a big deal for them. Last area was Shadow's Edge, the demon area. There's almost nothing to say about this. It's just the entire thing is just one dungeon. There is nothing there of any real interest. Now, when you're coming through and talk about story, this is where the story actually kind of starts. In terms of the story going through, Forged Lands has nothing to do with the story, almost at all. You could lift that area out, and the story would not change. Land of the Dead. Okay, you've gone to the Land of the Dead. You could quite easily put in a line saying like, right, you've got to release the souls from the King of Bones. He's got them all in the Land of the Dead. You need to get into his city and release the souls of humanity. Okay, fine. That is your first sentence. That's you lead straight in. It makes sense to go there. It makes sense to go to the Gilded Arena so you can get an audience with him, and then for him to do what you want, you got to get his 3 champions back, because that's the thing. That's what he wants. Okay, fine. I'm all with that. Then it's like, okay, so then you get the little twist. Like, okay, you've got to get you've got to go and get inside the Tree of Life to restart everything, by either, so to go there, so you've got to go to Lost Light to pick up one key and Shadow's Edge to pick up the other key. Okay, I can see that working. I can see that being relevant for the story. But again, it's like the whole corruption through line. There's not really much that's going on, because it's kind of, again, you could quite easily truncate a lot of what happens in Lost Light and remove good chunks of that, really. The first actual part of story really comes back is when you get to Shadow's Edge, when you meet Lilith, the great big the demon lady with the big thingies, and she's and that's when you get your next chunk of story, really, because she's then trying to twist everything to be like, oh yes, do you really want to do you want to save humanity, or do you want to really free the Nephilim? Ha 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 ha. Because she's trying to manipulate you. But because this happens so late on in the story, and is so it feels so inconsequential, because again, the whole premise of this is Death is trying to free War. He's made it abundantly clear in the few conversations he's had that the one thing he wants to do is save War, because War is his brother, and that's it. He's not shown any real guilt or remorse. He's shown guilt and remorse for killing the Nephilim, but not so much so that he wants to bring them back, that he wants to, he doesn't want them to suffer, but then he completely understands that they are bad guys and what they wanted to do was wrong and that they had to be stopped. He's not in two minds of that, and Lilith's trying to convince him otherwise. Now, again, with this, it's just kind of very much. We'll talk a bit more about the Nephilim when we talk about characters, but suffice to say, it's kind of, in terms of how this flows for the story, it's just kind of, while it's not coming out of nowhere, it is very much a case of why, what is happening with this? Why do I need? It comes too late through the story that for it to have any real meaningful impact. At least in terms of how this game is, and how the story for this game is, sorry. Then, your final twist at the Tree of Life. Corruption having chosen Absalom as a champion. Absalom we haven't spoken about yet, and we're going to talk about him when we get to characters, but all I will say at this point for story is this. At no point did you make me care that corruption was a big deal. At no point. It's kind of, if you want there to be, and you could have still had it be Absalom there in the Tree of Life saying like, haha, I never fully died, I dragged myself out of the well, blah blah blah. Now that you're here, I will use your amulet to bring back the Nephilim and kill humanity. It's like, okay, look, that's a slightly more compelling thing going on there. Fine. But again, I didn't, just because he was like the champion of corruption, it's kind of like, well, that's a very non-subtle twist, and even then, it's like that was the second conversation you have with him in the entire game. And sometimes you can pull off this whole thing of like barely seeing the bad guy until the end. In Majora's Mask, for example, you don't ever really talk to Majora until literally the very end of the game. So it's kind of like, well, it's how do I buy you as an intimidating villain? How do I buy you as something that I should be scared or worried about? And you have plans, yeah, but you're not scaring. I'm not convinced that you're a viable threat. It's like you pick a Bond movie, right? And it's kind of like, okay, you've only got most Bond movies. It's a brand new bad guy in each movie, and if you're trying to sell me, here's a little test for you. Pick a Bond movie. Name a villain. That's name a memorable villain that isn't like Goldfinger, Dr. No, or Blofeld. Like the actual main villain. So no Odd Job, no Jaws. It's like, it's really difficult. Now there are people out there who can do that, don't get me wrong. I'm sure if I sat down and thought about it, I could probably name one or two of them myself. But the point I'm trying to make with this is, it's kind of like, if you don't spend enough time with a villain and you don't build them up properly, it's kind of, and just, if they're just going to be like a generic haha I am the bad guy, you don't remember them. And if you don't remember them, you don't care. That's me dying another time. And that's kind of the point I'm making here. It's kind of, you've built up, this is corruption, he is a bad guy. It's like, he is just a bad guy. I'm not... He's no different from the trash mobs and bosses I've fought all the way up to this point, He is not anything special, or anything for me to be concerned or worried about. We'll talk about the DLC at the end. Right, so let's move into characters now, because we're going to touch more on corruption and Absalom when we talk about him. First character is Death. Oh yeah, Death. Now, Death is interesting, and he is a cold, sarky bastard, in that vein that we all love. Now, again, this is some... I can see what they were trying to do with him as a character. They were trying to have him have this cold sarcasm, and to kind of like hide the pain, as it were, of like things he's had to do, of like choices he's had to make, like wearing a mask, literally and figuratively, as he does in the game, having the whole little him taking the mask off just before he jumps into the Well of Souls at the end to sacrifice himself to bring back humanity, with the amulet, being the whole aha, I've taken off my mask, I'm getting rid of the pretense of who I was, I am better now, or I'm free of the pain, or whatever. The problem is, because they haven't made me care about... The one thing they've made me care about is... The one thing they have shown me is that Death genuinely cares for War, and he wants to bring him back. That's said enough times and shown enough times that it's kind of like, okay, I get that as a viable motive for Death. I can see that that's what he's going to do. That is his overall aim and goal. Fine. So I'm more than happy with that. But when you're trying to show that it may be a difficult decision for him when he's got to choose between the Nephilim, sort of damning the souls of all the Nephilim to save humanity, it really becomes a case of like, well, I've got to damn one to save the other, but the only thing I really want to do is save War. So to save War, I've got to get rid of the Nephilim and bring back humanity. It's not a decision. At least it was never shown to me to be much of a decision for Death. So him being this whole tortured personality of, oh my goodness, I've done these bad things, but I'm covering up with the sarcasm, I'm covering up with the humour. It's kind of like... I never really bought into that. That said, I really do like his dry sense of humour. I really enjoyed it. I like him being a cocky prick. It's I think it's like one of the last lines in the Demon Lord Belial DLC. It's like the Demon Lord is like, "Oh, I'm going to kill you," and that's like, we both know that's not true. Obviously, it's a little bit of a wink and a nod to the camera, because obviously this DLC came out after the game finished, and the whole thing is, we all know at that point he jumps in to sacrifice himself. But it's just in terms of his twisted sense of humour, it's always like, yeah, you're not going to kill me. Come on, I'm Death. You're not going to kill me. And then you got other scenes like, again, to go back to the Guardian, it's like, how many times did you have me kill this thing? He's got a dry sense of humour that I really enjoy. In terms of his particular playstyle, very fast, very quick and efficient, quite effective. I like it. We'll talk, but yeah, no, it's good. He's a good character. I enjoyed playing as Death, and I enjoyed his personality. In terms of his look, obviously when you say Death, you kind of get that image of like a skeleton in a great big black robe carrying a great big scythe. Now, I do like what they've done with the appearance of him here, being sort of like a grey, blue-skinned, like muscled goth kind of person with a skeleton mask. But when he goes into his Reaper mode, he is the giant skeleton with a great big robe and a great big scythe. Loving it. I do like the appearance. I do like the way they portrayed him. I don't think they could have done it any other way and had it work within within the storyline and setting of these worlds. It's kind of, this is the best way for doing it, really. Maybe if like his best armor in the game was like a full-on black robe or black robe style, so he looks more like the stereotypical version of Death. That may have been cooler. Maybe there's mods out there on the PC version of this game that you can do that. If there are PC versions of this game, I don't know off the top of my head. Okay, so Absalom. We're most of the way through the characters now, actually, because there's only like 3 characters that are actually worth talking about, and one of them, even then, has a bit of a proviso on it. Absalom. This person is supposed to be your antagonist. This person is supposed to be the main foil to our main character. That is not the case. This guy is basically he's got the backstory, he's got the potential, and yet nothing is done with it, or at least nothing effective is done with it. What you've got the main character. Sorry, Absalom is sort of pitched aside. He was the first Nephilim. He's the first Nephilim. He was the first one made. As Samael puts it, he was a perfect mold. Samael calls Death an imperfect copy from a perfect mold, and that's basically the whole point. Is Absalom was the perfect Nephilim. He was the perfect combination. And maybe demons thought that because he was more violent and bloodthirsty, and that's what demons are like. I don't know. But they never really build on that. Other than saying that he was the first Nephilim, that is his claim to fame. And then Death kills him at the Battle of Eden, or whatever they call it. And after he kills him, that's when Absalom gets dragged into the darkness and becomes the champion of corruption. Now, the thing is, for being a bad guy, it's like he is not focusing. It's kind of, he is just corrupting worlds. But it's kind of, you're trying to make me believe that this is the champion. Again, like I was saying during the playthrough, you did not sell to me that the idea that corruption was the big bad, that corruption was like the horrible thing. It was the monster. It was the antagonist. It was just something that was there. It was a way of giving you multiple enemy types, or new different enemy types that could do different things. That's what it really was. It was a way of giving you some weird, messed up scenery. You could have, and for the look of some of that scenery, you could have probably achieved the same thing with a bit of a palette swap. You could probably achieve the exact same thing and just call it Demon Invasion. You probably could. And I can't see much of a way of arguing around that, to be honest. Like I was saying, it's like Land of the Dead, no problems with corruption. No, when it comes to this is the thing. It's kind of, the more I think about this, it's kind of the more sort of wasted potential this is, because it's kind of, what you would need is maybe say every time you went through the Tree of Life, you had a conversation with Absalom. So that way you get like you get 3 conversations with him, maybe 4 depending, like 4, and then anything else after that, and that would be it. If you're going back to as you like go to new worlds, you get a new conversation with him. So 3 conversations: Forge Land to Land of the Dead, Land of the Dead to Lost Light to Shadow's Edge. Perfect. But that's it. It's kind of, you don't really get anything. It's kind of, you get one conversation, and then he has a little rant at you as you go into the Tree of Life to face him for the final time. Well, I say final time, for the first time in this actual playthrough of the game, because it's like, you don't fight him beforehand. It's not like one of these recurring villains you fight a few times who gets stronger each time. It's not like you fight aspects of him. He sends out corruption. Corruption infects a few things. And then in various other places, you're just fighting monsters or demons or whatever's in charge. It's like not really that corruption has that much of an impact on some of these things. So he's a very wasted villain, very wasted. I like the idea. It's like, okay, he is the perfect Nephilim. He is better than you. The only thing that the only reason you beat him the first time is you had the amped up power from the Charred Council, but now he's got more amped up power from corruption, or he's got amped up power from being part of the Tree of Life or something. You could come up with a good reason for why they're now on level pegging again, and thus meaning it's like, who really is better, Death or Absalom? But we'll never really know. All the other characters, the people in the Forge Lands, there's not really anything to say about them because they don't really do anything other than just be relevant for the plot of the Forge Lands, which is get out of the Forge Lands, or get to the Tree of Life, so you can leave the Forge Lands. It's not anything relevant to any of them. None of them appear in other worlds or do anything that relates to other worlds, really. I believe there is one side quest that we didn't do, that basically you take a note from Nathaniel, the angel, to the Land of the Dead, and then from the Land of the Dead to the woman in the Forge Lands, the white-haired woman that I fancied, because CGI women are cool. and then back to Nathaniel, just to kind of get it all translated. But that's it. And that's the only thing that kind of really goes across. And you have the hunter, the trainer who basically sends you off to kill like 4 monsters, 3 of which I think are in the Forge Lands, 1 of which is a boss monster in the Land of the Dead. So no, 2 of them are in the Land of the Dead. 1 was a boss monster, 1 of them's an optional boss. So not a massive amount, but yeah. Right. So it doesn't really. There's no characters there that are really worth talking about. Land of the Dead. I liked the characters in the Land of the Dead. The Lord of Bones and the Chancellor. Though they were pretty cool. They made me laugh. I liked that. But to all honesty, I wasn't. So they weren't. Again, there's not really enough about them because nothing carries through. Nothing. It's literally a case of they're interesting for their world, and their interactions are positive. But that's all I can really say. It's kind of like the Chancellor's all up himself because they're like, yes, you don't get to talk. You don't get to talk to the Lord of Bones without my permission. No, sorry, leave me alone. It's fun. It's interesting. But that's all he's got. And then the Lord of the Bones is just a grumpy dead man, and it's like, okay, you're kind of cool as well. The way you carry yourself is kind of interesting. But again, there's not really anything else to it. Ostagoth and Volgrim are the only 2 characters that kind of go from one world to another. You find Volgrim in all 4 worlds, and you find Ostagoth in Land of the Dead and the Demon World. Interesting, only shows up in those 2 worlds. But you can theorize on that as much as you like. So, not a massive amount in terms of the characters there to really mention or talk about. Now, the last thing really to talk about is going to be the DLC. Before I kind of hit on my kind of conclusion for all this. The DLC. Okay, the first one was... what was the first one? The first one was Christmas time in the Land of the Dead. So for the Tomb of Argul, or Argul, however we're going to say it. It's basically just a short dungeon, a combat section, and then a bigger dungeon with a Frost Dragon boss at the end, which was pretty cool. I did like the Frost Dragon boss. It was a nice challenge. But there is no reason why this could not have been part of the main story. While it doesn't feel like it was something that was taken out of the main story, it's kind of, I don't think it's substantial enough on its own to really be to be more of a thing. I don't think it is. But that's just me for that one. So it doesn't really add anything to the lore. It doesn't add anything extra. It gives a bit of character depth to Ostagoth because he's the one who summons you there and he's like, look, you go and kill this dude. I will consider you square with me on all the information I've been giving you. So, okay, but that's so he obviously wants Argul dead, but we don't know why. And we can come up with a few reasons, like maybe Argul was the one who killed off a lot of his people, because he does walk around talking about how he doesn't really have people left. It's like, okay, you're a lone merchant person who has info. I don't know enough about you to care beyond that. The next DLC was the Abyssal Forge, and that was so depressingly short that I'm actually still a bit angry about that, and I'm recording this like about 2 weeks or so, 2-3 weeks after having played that. Just to kind of give you a bit of perspective of how that all went through. I'm just not impressed with that at all. It was find these 10 crystals, break them, go to a boss. That's it. It wasn't even a dungeon. It's a dungeon by technicality, but it's not a dungeon. It's not. It's a little bit of a maze, but okay, technically it's a dungeon, but it's such a weak dungeon that I don't want to call it one. But it was, you know, depressingly short. Leaving us with the last dungeon being last DLC being the Demon Lord Belial, or Belial, depending how you want to how it's pronounced. This one was a bit more. This one was more in line with the first one, Argyl's Tomb, in terms of how it's all sort of set out and done. But it takes you back to the ruined Earth. You know, you're kind of travelling around on the ruined Earth, and it's kind of like, you know what? Yeah, you're having a look at some of the. You're having a look, and you know what? Yeah, you're trying to find the remnants of humanity, because you think they're been given like reports. You've heard that, you know, there might be someone running around, and it turns out there is one person. And, you know, okay, that's cool. That's a nice twist. That's actually more in line with the story than anything else is, really, in terms of other DLC, and even like the Forge Lands. The Forge Lands part of the main game has less to do with the main story than this DLC does. Interesting little note there. Now, obviously the DLC stuff kind of got made later. I know how a lot of these, in terms of how these things work, sometimes content is cut out of a game beforehand, and sometimes it's made after the fact. From what I can tell, I haven't fully researched this, so please, you know, if I'm wrong, do correct me in the comments section below. But I'm pretty sure all of this stuff got made after the fact, or they finished the main game and then they made it. I'm pretty sure that's the way around. Obviously, like I said, I might be incorrect with that, but you never know. I don't know. The thing is, with this stuff, if it was made to coincide with the game in terms of it coming out, it was part of the original game and cut out, I don't see how you could fit any of it in. You know, potential things like Argyl's Tomb. Yeah, okay. Because you could have that as part of Land of the Dead, obviously, because that's where it fits in. But because the scenery is quite different, it's a lot more ice-based rather than just. That's why I was making jokes about it being Christmas time. It's not connected enough that it's really that much of a thing, you know. I'm not too bothered. You couldn't fit it in. You couldn't just naturally fit it in. It's not like you could walk off to the side and find that area. You know, it clearly does feel like a DLC, whether that was made after the fact or completely separated out with the map. It's, you know. The Abyssal Forge, which is the depressingly short one with the Mad Smith and the one boss. It's kind of that one. That one you could fit in, because that's supposed to happen between the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death. So going from the Forge Lands to the Land of the Dead, you could have that as a random level in there, or that could be like something that show, you know, you throw in a load more stuff about corruption. You could have that link into why Absalom talks to you there. You know, before you get to the Land of the Dead. You know, don't put in any like secrets or anything, so you can't. So the fact that you can't go back there doesn't really become an issue. Then it's fine. Then Demon Lord Belial. That one, because that happens on Earth, you could fit that into the Earth dungeon. In fact, that probably should have been a lot. Again, it's not because it happens on Earth. You could attach it into that dungeon quite easily if you wanted to, but it doesn't feel like it was ever actually part of it and just ripped out of the game. So it's kind of, I'll give them credit for creating these, but I'm a bit about. Now, when it comes to the DLC, it's kind of 2 hits and a miss. You know, it was fun. It was all fun. It was all good stuff. I mean, again, even the Abyssal Forge being depressingly short was still relatively enjoyable in its own way. Now, and this kind of brings me on to my sort of conclusion here. Ultimately, I enjoy this game because it's a fighting game. You know, the story is there to kind of connect it all together. I do kind of get the impression though that this game would do a lot better, or could have done a lot better, if you could have played as any of, say, the other 3 riders, so not War, because he's obviously out of the picture at the moment, but you've got Death, Fury, and Strife. So I think that's what they call. They've got Fury and Strife rather than Pestilence or War. I think that's how they've done it with the names. But then, if this was kind of like a game where you could play as any of the 3 of them, and you just change the cutscenes around, give them put different dialogue, different voice acting in there, you know, different comments and stuff, it'd give the game a bit more replayability, and it'd also work a little bit better because you don't get a lot of sort of dialogue or characterization for Death in this game, but you'd have the perfect amount if this was a game where you have multiple characters in it, because it'd make more sense that there's not loads from each character because they're splitting it all up. So because you're doing 3 characters in there, so that would make sense to me, and that would be sort of my. Obviously, it's been out for years. They're never going to add this in. They're never going to make this as the game. But you know, it's just kind of my little 2 cents on that. I mean, the story it's not a story. It's basically a premise that is put there so there is a reason to be going from place to place to place, but it's not done well enough or executed well enough or strong. It's not presented in a way that's executed well enough to make me be thrilled about it. It's kind of, this game is basically a fighting game. It's a spectacle fighter. It's there for you to kill loads of cool stuff in cool ways and make you feel good about yourself. You know, it's kind of like God of War 2 had one of the best stories you could have in a spectacle fighter. God of War 3 gets a lot of credit, but ultimately God of War 3 is you're just wreaking bloodlusty vengeance on everyone. That's it. You're not doing anything special. There's no real story to that game. It's literally a case of this is effectively an elongated version of the ending of God of War 2. And that's all it is. And that's kind of what you've got with this. It's kind of, this is just a fighting. This is just you fighting and killing stuff in different locations. You're killing different things in different locations. And for that, it's fine. It works well and it's serviceable. I love the art style. It looks very metal. I love that. I like how the game played. I enjoyed a lot of it. So, just wrapping this up now, I'm thinking that I'm not going to like give the game like if I had to give the game a mark out of 10, I'd give it like a solid 7. But that's literally on the strength of just the fun I was having while playing it. It's kind of, ultimately I know the story isn't as strong as it is, not strong enough. The story should be stronger. Gameplay has a few niggles here and there. Could be better. And ultimately, while I did really enjoy it, I'm not going to sit here. If someone wants to turn around and say, no, it wasn't very good, and give me good reasons why, I'm not going to argue with you on it, because I can see the flaws, and I think hopefully I've covered them well enough here. So, that's it. I would just like to say, on a little note here, thank you, all of you, for watching these. I know a few people have been going through and trying to watch everything. I thank you for that. Now that this is done, I'll be moving on to something else. I'll be continuing Skyrim, though I have slowed down on that recently. Please watch Sean's videos on Spider-Man. He's turning those out when he can. Not that I'm jealous at all, but he's getting so many more views on his videos than I'm getting on mine. And with that, I will see you with the next videos, and well, I won't tell you what they are yet, but we'll save that for a surprise for later. Cheerio.